The Man with the Cloven Thumb by Elliot Fisher. Part 1. Chapter 1. Dusk descended on the two-faced head of Janus, Roman guardian of doors, as it flickered into life. Rain clouds dimmed the day as the god's two faces glowed at the apex of an arched doorway and lit the wet wall behind. Fused together, their blank neon expressions faced away from each other. A slogan splashed across the arch read, "Everything depends on the beginning. Every day there is a new beginning." The archway spanned the entrance to Infiltrates Incorporated, a second-rate metastasis provider offering reasonably priced packages for management teams with an eye on their budget. Underneath, an employee was trying to shelter from the rain, with little success. Although tall, the archway was deceptively shallow, and she stood peering through the locked glass doors, flinching as rain spattered down her neck. At last, a security drone arrived. An alarm flashed on its chest to warn her of its primed defences as, unseen by the employee, the building's automated weapons systems targeted her too. "Please step back from the doors and keep your hands in plain sight." The employee stepped back 3 paces and opened her palms. What little shelter there'd been was now obsolete, and she stood helpless as the rain sheeted down on her. Rivulets of water ran over her face, and she tried not to blink as the drone scanned her retina. The alert on its chest flicked green. "Welcome back, Miss Corridon. I'm sorry you've lost or broken your eye line. Shall we issue a replacement? There'll be a deduction from your wages." No, that's fine. I have it here," she said, flashing a glimpse of the device on her wrist. "The ID transmission on this thing is bust." Ray Corridon followed the drone into Infiltrates Incorporated Divisional Headquarters, a small splinter tower compared to the colossal corporate leviathans it nestled amongst. She flicked water from her hair and hoped her old redingote could still dry itself. "I'll contact technical..." "Don't bother. Told them weeks ago. Just clear me through to floor 32 and make sure I can access all the suites. My cluster will be here soon." Up on the 32nd floor, Ray tried to muster the enthusiasm to prep the rig. She'd rather have been watching a TV show. In the bath, gin and tonic, hollow projection at just the right height so she wouldn't have to crane her neck. The latest series of big gay billionaires on autoplay, instead of this stark old metastasis suite. Which cluster was she lumped with tonight? They were such a homogeneous gloop these days. A quick jab at her wrist console woke her eyeline and a projection flickered up from her wrist. Ray checked her schedule. She remembered them now. That chirpy crowd, trying so hard to get on with each other. All smiles, light jokes, and vigorous nodding. Hadn't she only just adjusted them? Their last session only seemed like yesterday. Ray heaved herself to her feet with a sigh and set the recliners upright. Good God, the excruciating dance this lot went through each week. They'd flutter in any minute now, whittering on about some shite or other, a polite aperitif about the traffic, or some amuse-bouche from a TV show. Being privy to the group's essential nature, Ray could have told them what a gaggle of vicious shitweasels they really were. And she'd have been spot on. But panicular modelling technicians are forbidden from disclosing any such information. Besides, she was trying to hold it down as best she could. Another written warning, and she'd be subject to an official complaints procedure. Each recliner in the circle needed inspecting. Ray checked the nests of ampoules and lipid-soluble nasal sprays embedded in the armrests first. Once the touchpads had booted up, she punched in a few commands and began a preparatory test. While waiting for it to finish, Ray flopped into her recliner and told her eyeline to play the episode of Who Wants to Be a Victorian Wrestler from where she'd left off. The show wasn't to her taste, but she'd begun watching it during breakfast and now felt compelled to finish the season. Without taking her eyes off the hollow projection shining from her wrist, Ray rummaged around in her pocket for a box of dental sticks and began cleaning her teeth. There was a time she'd watched nothing but foreign language indie films and artistically relevant TV series. A well-versed viewer who knew which directors to follow and which production companies took brave programming decisions. That was all too cerebral for her now. Just a reminder of those years at the academy. Friends she didn't see anymore. The thrill of learning. Actual pride in her chosen field. Ray examined the watery pink blood on the tip of her dental stick as a celebrity with an enormous handlebar moustache talked earnestly to camera about his last wrestling bout. The empty recliners were arranged in a circle, hooked up and ready. A familiar blend of dread and disgust rose in her. Ray's eyeline pinged as the preparatory test completed its analysis. Everything seemed more or less okay for a change. This metastasis rig needed a service. Infiltrates Incorporated were not what you'd call big spenders. The cables hung from recliner to recliner in coils, which had been patched and fixed so often. It'd be a miracle if there was an original component left in the whole knotted mess, which was why Ray had come in early to run her diagnostics. The rig had been an impressive piece of kit at one time, and although it was slow and unreliable, it still worked. It still tuned in to the complex interactions within Ray's clusters, and the battered old rig still produced a simulation, a kind of collective dream for Ray to interact with, where she tweaked whatever subliminal processes she found. And they still sent her cluster after cluster for their routine upgrades, regular as clockwork. Small groups of employees with all those persistent and regrettable personal issues, profit-threatening issues, which Ray treated in metastasis, using a cocktail of hormone and neurogene therapy. When they awoke, their unhelpful, or more importantly, unprofitable habits of building relationships were subtly modified. After a few sessions, the group's rough edges were smoothed, and their crossed wires realigned. Ultimately, a PAMMO tech dealt with all the confusion and torment and disaster that came with people misunderstanding one another. That was the theory. It had sounded profound to Ray and her friends at the academy. The thought of exorcising the ghosts that haunted people's minds had been romantic and appealing. But for some years, Ray's contact with her old cohort had become more sporadic, and the distance between her and her clients had yawned wider. Part of the problem was that employees attended metastasis as a matter of routine. Most people only encountered it in places like this, as an obligatory procedure their company insisted upon. And having no memory of what happened in the simulation, the cluster inevitably saw their panicular modelling technician as just another provider of another service. A necessary one, but an impersonal one. Ray looked around at the 6 empty recliners. They'd be here soon enough. She switched off the TV, closed her eyes, and took 3 deep breaths. The room was okay. The rig was prepped and checked. The lipids all seemed fine. It was just a question of hours and minutes, Ray reminded herself. And she'd be done for the day. 32 floors below, Janice continued staring at the glowing company slogan. Ray heard the doors down the corridor whisk apart, and she opened her eyes. Everything depends on the beginning. And every day, there is a new beginning.